All right. Well, welcome to another episode of Why This Beer. Join us as we discuss all the things that make our craft beer scene unique and the people that help sculpt these great brews. And today, books. I'm Aslan Graves of Main Street Brewing, and as always, joined by Darren Benema, Neighborhood Brewing, and Yellow Dog Penticton.
Hey, what's up? What's up?
Today we have Noelle Phillips of Douglas College and author of the new book Brewmasters and Brewery Creek, A History of Craft Beer in Vancouver, Then and Now. Welcome, Noelle.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. So, kicking this off, we usually just go through an intro of how you got into craft beer and what's been your journey. What was your first exposure? Yeah.
Oh, my first exposure. I remember the first time I recall liking beer was actually a Granville Island beer way back in the day.
Nice.
They weren't technically craft by that point, but it still made me realize like I don't actually hate all of this. So I grew up in a small town where everyone's just drinking Labatt and whatever, and so yeah, it was a revelation. I actually got into thinking about beer a lot more through my studies of the Middle Ages because I have a Ph.D. in medieval literature, and
Yeah.
I've written and I published on what's called medievalism, which is how the Middle Ages sort of shows up in modern culture. And through a conference presentation and a really weird event in London, I really started thinking about how medievalism works in beer marketing, and that ended up being my
Oh, yeah.
first book. But it
Neat.
was sort of a bit of a windy road, and I was able to connect other representations of brewing that I'd written about before from medieval texts, and sort of bring them together into this examination of what beer was like in the Middle Ages, and then how do we imagine beer was in the Middle Ages now, like, and what kind of cultural work
Right.
does that do when we kind of recreate the Middle Ages for ourselves?
So would that be in the lines of like some of the gruits that people have brewed and
Yeah, I mean, Gruit
things like that?
is certainly imitating a medieval style. There's actually in the second book I co-edited, there's a great article by Susan Verberg on a lot of the misinterpretations of Gruit, and she does a kind of a deep dive into translations and what Gruit actually was, and she myth busts quite a lot, which I think is great. But it's not just Gruit. It goes all the way into the use of the idea of monks in brewing, the kinds of fonts
Mm,
people use when they're marketing their beer, even the idea that somehow the origins of our beer go back to the Middle Ages as if that's the start. But of course, that's not the start. I mean, the start is in the Middle East and North Africa thousands of years before. And so it's also kind of interesting how we tend to sort of see beer's origins in the European Middle Ages and not in, ancient Sumeria.
yeah, that
Nice.
is interesting. Yeah, you
Yeah.
think of like movies and television too, and a lot of Middle Ages, like big drinking big cups in metal
Yeah.
cups of, you assume like some sort of beer or something like that, right?
And they were
But you don't always
absolutely,
see
for
that.
sure. They
Yeah,
were. It's just that
yeah,
it wasn't a new thing, right? It wasn't like this is where it started or something. Then it had been
Hmm.
going on for a long time, for sure.
yeah.
I remember
Interesting.
hearing a thing about how the Gauls were viewed as savages for drinking beer. Is that true? Like,
Um, yeah, well, I think there was a kind of a pushback against beer because um, the Romans were a big wine drinking culture. So they didn't favor beer, and yeah, the people drinking beer were sort of seen to be those kind of out at the edges of the empire, and so it definitely had a reputation for that. It improved over the years, so by the time we get to like the High Middle Ages, you have the King of England who sends a couple of huge kind of giant barrels, giant casks of beer over to France as a gift to the French king, who, of course, in France, of course, prides himself on wine. And
Yeah.
it was considered like this is our luxury, is this beer. I'm curious about how stable that beer managed to be in a time where they weren't using hops and traveling across the channel. I'm not sure. So I'm not sure what it was like. I don't know what the
Yeah.
French king actually thought of it, but it was enough that the King of England felt proud to gift it.
Oh,
cool.
yeah. I heard a
Yeah.
similar story on a beer tour once where like the monks were fasting, and they would only drink beer and this like very strong beer. So the story goes, and I guess the Pope heard about it, or someone higher up, and the clergy heard about it, and it's like, okay, send me this beer that you're drinking. And they had sent it like a long distance as well. And then the beer had gone so rancid by the time it got there. He goes, well, if it's this bad, they're really, really punishing themselves.
Oh my gosh, I hadn't heard that
Yeah.
story, but it's definitely true that monks were drinking beer every day. And there's records of like one particular abbey would give a gallon of beer a day to each monk.
Wow.
But the beer was actually fairly low alcohol, so it wasn't a high alcohol beer. And people were just drinking it all day, every day. And monks, even when they were fasting, they would be expected still to drink beer. And the monks that were extra holy might only drink water, but that was like if you were really, really holy. But mostly, it's like it's good. You're fine if you're just drinking beer.
Yeah.
And like kids, kids are drinking it, and it's all fairly low
Yeah.
alcohol. They did. There was a funny broadside. So broadsides are these sort of notices that they'd put up on poles, kind of like public posters. And this is
Okay.
a 17th century broadside, and it was a warning to tavern owners who had apparently figured out how to age beer and increase its alcohol content by using wine barrels. And they'd
Okay.
taken barrels meant for the Navy and stored their beer to make it higher alcohol to get people drunk faster. At least that's what the broadside said. And it basically says,
Yeah.
the king tells you you're not allowed to do this anymore. And they were, this is meant for
Yeah.
the Navy, not for you guys. But they, they were just boozing up the beer and figured out a good aging strategy and got their
Yeah.
customers tanked, I guess.
That's awesome.
It's amazing how industrious people are.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
you got to be creative.
Yeah.
So, in researching for the Beer and Brewing in Medieval Culture book, where were you getting most of your sources for that? And like, was it hard to collect credible sources? Or...
So half of that book was modern material, and then half of it was medieval. So I didn't do. I used a lot of older editions for that book. I don't think I was working directly with any specific manuscripts. I was evaluating how they talked about beer at the time and how it was kind of presented as part of the culture by contemporary texts. So a wide range of of religious texts, of poems, of household books where you leave entries about daily things and what you bought and that kind of stuff. But a lot of literary texts. So, beer is a subject and drunkenness is a subject of literary exploration. And I particularly liked my drunkenness chapter and looking at how medieval people viewed drunkenness. Sometimes as in part a kind of visionary experience. But in the book I co-edited, there's some really, and for anyone who's interested, they can get in touch with me. There's some really interesting chapters that use that really dig into some primary materials from England and from Scandinavia and from Central Europe that talk about the records of beer and brewing and the kind of minutiae of all of that, including examinations of the language, like what are the words used to describe these different categories of malt or beer versus ale versus mead. So the people that were in that collection did a lot of amazing work, and I'm happy to sort of provide that information to anyone who's interested in doing some hardcore beer source reading.
Deep dives.
Yeah.
Sweet.
With being a homebrewer, have you tried to recreate or use any ingredients
No.
based on some of your research?
No, I'm not that daring. I'm pretty boring. Although what I do make myself feel better because I'm like, do you know what? Almost all of the beer in the Middle Ages was more or less sour. Almost all of it.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
once it's called clear ale, it means that it has settled and therefore has soured, and they're just used to it. If it's sweet ale, it means it's fresh. But most people, they drink it and it was like a little bit sour, a little bit tart, and that was fine. So I like to think like every time I have an oxidized beer or like I have diacetyl in it or whatever, that it's like, oh, it's like kind of medieval, right? It's sort of like
It's historic.
it's
Yeah.
historic.
Yeah.
It's like a traditional beer.
Yeah.
I mean, I
Yeah.
think that'd be so interesting.
The
I
things we
just
know as off flavors now are maybe just
yeah,
historical accuracies.
I
There
know.
you go.
You know, and it's sometimes you have to be a bit, you know, maybe something's not always an off flavor. You can play with it. So
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
that.
With Brewmasters and Brewery Creek being your second book on historical beer, did you find it easier to research being in a local market?
yes. Yeah, absolutely. And also having access to
Actually being able to talk to people
being able to talk to people
directly.
was
Yeah.
amazing. Like, I mean, the SFU craft beer archive that Melanie Hardbattle and Richard Dancy have set up has been amazing. And they've collected a particularly valuable acquisition has been they have all of the notes and collected documents from Greg Evans, who is a beer historian. Many people know of him. I dedicated my book to him and to the craft brewers of BC. And there's just boxes and boxes of all the material. Like, he had worked for years and years on a history of brewing on Vancouver Island, and it included some Lower Mainland stuff. So it was just so valuable. And then
Nice.
so that he covers a lot
Did
of
you know that
early
going
stuff.
into it?
I'd heard about Greg Evans, but I had started the project before, like shortly before they really set the archive up, and it was kind of a nice confluence of events where I realized
Yeah.
shortly into it that this had been established. So
Nice.
and it's open to everyone, and so they also have they have old bottles, and they have tap handles, and they have all these like archive labels, and you can just go in there and look at all of it. Like, it's really cool. So I was able to. I love talking to everyone, you know, who's still with us now for the second part of the book, which is 20th century, 21st century. For the first part, like, a lot of the Greg Evans material is super helpful, and then I ended up finding a couple of men, tracking down a couple men who are relatives of the brewers from back in the day, and that took a while.
Oh, neat.
But two of them were at the event at Main Street the other night,
Yeah.
last week on November 7th. So the great 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 grandson of Charles Doring, who has so many amazing records that I
Wow.
would love to dive into again. And then the great grandson of John Dyke, and John Dyke was the first brewer at Stanley Park Brewing in 1896.
Wow.
Wow.
So
That's sweet.
contrary to the new Stanley Park Brewing's label, they didn't start in 1897. They started in 1896.
Heard it
Have you
here
brought that
first.
up with them?
I have not, no.
One more year too. I mean, you think you want to
Yeah.
just brag about how old?
Yeah.
For those that haven't gotten the book yet, do you want to give us just like a bird's eye view of what you talk about? You kind of mentioned the two major sections in the book, but yeah, maybe just kind of broadly talk about it as well, so people know kind of what is covered.
Yeah. So it's the focus is independent brewing in BC. So we think of it as craft, but because we don't call it craft in the 19th century, as like it's independent. So it started with the founding of Vancouver in 1886 and Vancouver's very first breweries. And I trace what happens with the breweries in Vancouver. I do stick with Vancouver. New West has a kind of separate narrative that's happening at the time. And I realized with the size of the book that I couldn't cover everything. So it was really Vancouver and the people involved, the politics they were involved in, the people they were married to, all the sort of stories that humanize these people. So there were 4 or 5 main breweries and then a few others that I trace out. And then it sort of tracks what happens when brewery consolidations began to occur around the turn of the century. And by 1911, most of the breweries are getting swallowed up into like bigger brewing corporations. And then by 1917,
Right.
there's prohibition. So you can kind of see the independent brewing industry shrinking down and dying well before prohibition, thanks to
Interesting.
brewing consolidations and the kind of priorities of business people over like actual beer quality and that kind of thing. And then it jumps forward to basically the late 70s, where we have a beer lockout of the three major beer companies, Canadian beer companies in Vancouver. All of the employees were locked out. The employer tries to make beer and they can't really. They run out of beer. The summer is dry. People are bootlegging Budweiser in.
Can you imagine?
Like, oh,
Wow, what a
yeah,
time.
wow. But I mean, people were mad at Canadian brewing, at the industry.
Yeah,
They were unhappy
yeah.
with it. And that's when Frank Appleton is writing his underground brewmaster article, essentially lambasting the industry for ruining beer and saying people can make their own beer better. This inspired John Mitchell, who read it, a British expat living in Horseshoe Bay. He owned a pub, drives to the Kootenays, he meets Frank, and they're like, let's start to make our own beer. And they're like, the law won't let us. And they go, well, we'll change the law. And that's what they did. And so
Yeah.
the second part of the book begins with that story of how they changed the legislation that prohibited independent brewing, essentially. And they started the first craft brewery in Canada. It's actually a brew pub, but same thing, almost the same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then that follows kind of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, like the revival in the 2010s, and then sort of what happens post-pandemic.
Yeah.
And that first craft brewery, was that the one that was in Horseshoe Bay there, the Trollers?
Yeah, so that was a Horseshoe Bay brewery, which was shut down. It was 1982 to 1984, and then it was shut down for various reasons. You can read the book. But then it was actually reopened by John Mitchell's assistant, David Bruce Thomas. A couple years later, he took his own tow truck to the scrapyard and got all that brewing equipment back after the owners of the pub were just going to crush it. And he brought it back and he reopened, with John's help, he reopened it under a very similar name. It was like Horseshoe Bay Brewing Company instead of Horseshoe Bay Brewery. And then he started brewing again. And he actually hired, so if you know Bill Herdman of Tall Ship Ales.
Okay, know of, yeah.
So Bill Herdman was like a big IPA innovator back in the 90s, but he actually hired Bill Herdman as one of his brewers early on. And they had very different attitudes. And I didn't put this in the book, but apparently Bill Herdman used to hotbox the brew house. And so David was like, I've had enough of this. Like, I'm tired of smelling like pot every time I come in here. So but then of course he went and opened Tall Ship Ales and was very successful there.
No wonder why there's that dank note in West Coast IPAs.
Yeah, right. It came from that. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. That's
awesome.
That's amazing. And yeah, the book's like filled with stories and great captivating writing. You've done a great job of just bringing people along and putting them into that setting.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the idea is that I didn't want this to be just an academic book. I needed it to be well researched, but I wanted to make it so that people would like reading it.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's lots of really good anecdotes in it too that like keep it like fun too. Because like the whole thing is, I thought it was, there's some super like brave people behind both like sides, like both of the chapters, I guess, of it.
Yeah.
Where you see these people like opening breweries and they know nothing about it. They're like, well, let's they know someone that knows how to make beer. Let's go there. Let's go to Victoria and learn from them for a couple of years.
Yeah.
And then they get enough confidence, like, oh, we could do this. And then the same parallels are like in the next chapter, like almost 100 years later. I'm like, oh, okay. And this person was here and they talked to, Ian from at Yaletown or something like that at the time. And now, they're making sour beer. And I thought that was cool. Like the parallels are like overlap so interestingly that way. It's cool.
It's man, there's so many, like, I sort of think of it as like a weird Venn diagram of just like all these overlapping circles. But it makes me think actually of the beer that I'm drinking right now, which is the Raven Cream Ale from R&B. It's not a cream ale. It's a dark mild, and R&B knows this. But this was actually the beer that was originally, they're emulating the recipe at Shaftesbury, one of the very early Vancouver breweries. Shaftesbury created a dark, mild, and a bitter, and these names did not resonate with people in 1986. And so Paul Beaton was like, let's call it a cream ale. He saw the name somewhere. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know what a cream ale was. He's like, it sounds creamy. It sounds like people will like to drink it. And it was essentially this recipe that Barry Benson then reverse engineered for R&B. And it was one of their best selling. I mean, it's really what made Shaftesbury so successful was this beer. Those guys knew nothing about brewing at all. They knew zero. They were a couple of waiters. They were servers. And their two colleagues who were also waiters ended up starting Brown's and the Cactus Club later on. But Paul and Tim started Shaftesbury. And yeah, they just said, hey, John Mitchell knows how to brew beer. Maybe he can teach us. And yeah, he spent a week with them, taught them how to brew. And they're like, go ahead.
Yeah.
And they
Wow.
and they know that now. I mean,
real crash course.
Oh my gosh, I can't even. I can't imagine. Brad McKay helped them set up their brewing equipment, and they got help from Horseshoe Bay as well. Everyone kind of knew each other, and like Tim Wittig said to me, he's like, Shaftesbury would never make it now. Like it just wouldn't. Like this, the landscape has changed. The quality of the beer is so different, but at the time, they were primed for success. Like they had the guts. They just tried to do it.
Yeah.
Nothing else was out there. Almost nothing else was out there. And they ended up being hugely successful by the time they sold. So, the kind of courage that you mentioned is that's what sort of makes me think of like this dark, mild, this fake cream ale. Reminds me of that. Yeah.
Defines a whole new regional style for BC cream ale.
It does. Michael
get a BJCP
Jackson.
recognition.
I think so. It's because it's definitely like this style is one of the beers that got me also into craft beer, like Shaftesbury Cream Ale.
Yeah.
Drank a bunch of that, and then also this beer as well. I remember going to like a ultimate game, and there was just like 2 beers available, and it was Sun God Wheat Ale and this one, the cream ale. It's like that was it.
Yeah.
Because I think that's maybe not what they were only brewing at that time, but maybe the only one of the two.
It was one of their cores
in a lot of them.
Yeah, it was one of their cores.
Yeah. Oh, and it's still a core at R&B, I believe.
Yeah, I think it is.
Yeah.
But it was one of their 3 at the beginning.
The 3 main ones, Red Devil, Sun God, and Raven.
Yeah.
And personally, it was this style, like this, I call it a BC cream ale, was the first style that I did like a R&D or a pilot brew when I was at Yellow Dog.
Oh, nice.
And I remember looking for like recipes online. I'm like, these cream ales aren't right. Like these are yellow corn beers, because I didn't know much about brewing at the time. So I was like, what's happening?
You definitely try to lobby to get the BCJB to the BJCP to include it in all their in their style guidelines, because I like calling it that.
Yeah.
And the Michael Jackson's World Guide to, I think it's his World Guide to Beer. It's one of those big beer books that he did. Not the pop star, the other, the beer one. He gives Shaftesbury a mention, and he likes the beer, and he says he calls it a perplexingly named cream ale. But apparently, the Shaftesbury boys remember him coming through. So does Gary Lowen, actually, when he went to Sailor Hagar's, and they both talk about how much he was able to drink. Like, there's no flights back then. They're having like 3 full pints and going on to the next one and having more. I'm like, wow.
Well, you really got to try it a bit.
It's an adult's flight.
Yeah, it's an adult's flight. Yeah, just 4 big giant ones.
Yeah. 4 pints of beer.
Yeah, and apparently he would also have a big steak with it, with his beer too. This is what I've been told.
Nice.
Yeah.
Healthy.
Oh yeah, it's all about the health. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder if that like originates from his like English pub heritage and then an upbringing, and then like
imagine, yeah.
And it made sense when the beers were 3 to 4%, but then
yeah, you wouldn't do this for a 7% IPA or something, but yeah.
feel like a guy like him though would probably only get more charming.
Yeah, I think he'd be probably really fun to have a bunch of beers with.
Yeah. What was one of the most surprising discoveries for the history of Vancouver or Western Canada, like going in to it, like any weird ingredients, unsolved mysteries, odd traditions, besides hotboxing the brew house?
Yeah, well, I like the
Yeah.
hotboxing, yeah, and I didn't mention that. There's a few interesting things. There was well, another modern thing was just finding everyone's sort of notes and like personal reflections on things in the archives.
Oh yeah.
So
Oh, yeah.
breweries, without naming names, but like this is back in the kind of 90s, but breweries kind of making pot shots at other breweries in their notes. It made you realize it's like these guys think they're God's gift, and this kind of like, and I think there's a bit of a tongue in cheek, but it's just funny to see it written down.
Yeah.
Just like when they're doing a beer that's comparable to another brewery's, you think?
It's well, I'm sort of
They're
wondering
like,
if it was
ours is
that.
much
Yeah,
better
yeah,
than.
like it feels
Yeah.
like, and some of this was like related to business planning and or like they're doing market research and just kind of leaving comments. But they're very funny. They're very humorously expressed. So I didn't include any of those in the, even though they're in the archives, I didn't want to include them, but they definitely made me laugh.
No,
I
yeah.
was like, oh, like that's a bit saucy of you to say. I discovered a beer style I'd not heard of before that was made by a Columbia brewery, one of the 19th century breweries, and it's, I don't know, maybe you guys know of it, maybe you've made it, but it was called Kulmbacher.
Oh,
Have not.
no.
And
No.
it was a very like traditional dark German lager that was super popular with the German immigrants when they first would come over. And Columbia Brewery was
Cool.
advertising it, and it was the only brewery in town that was making this kind of beer. It was just them, and Columbia was weird in a whole bunch of different ways. But you can read the Columbia chapter. But I enjoyed finding out that. Um, I also just in general, I think I hadn't realized that there was just not supposed to be any drinking in breweries at all in the 19th century.
Right.
It was illegal. You were not supposed to do it. Breweries were fully wholesale. They did not have retail licenses. And so there was significant drinking in breweries, but it was all illegal. And they would be told, and there's various accounts of this, they would be accused of running an illegal tap room when this happened. And they had all sorts of ways of like trying to twist the law to try to excuse what they were doing using like provincial versus federal and dominion licensing and trying to find legal loopholes because they wanted their breweries to be that kind of gathering place, but they just weren't allowed to. It was saloons that were supposed to be the gathering place, and saloons had this terrible reputation at the time. So breweries were began to be sort of substitutes for saloons, but it was all fully illegal. And I hadn't really realized that this was never supposed to happen until I saw all these lawsuits. So that was an interesting discovery for me.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Yeah,
tap
it's
room we
interesting.
know it today is it's a very recent.
Yeah,
Like,
very
I mean,
modern concept.
Yeah.
Yeah.
even since Darren and I started
Since
in
like
the industry, it's like it
2013.
used to be.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Four flights or one pint, and that was the max serving for your tasting license.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Then you had to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and even before then, it wasn't even really, no one was doing it like as a concept either. Like that, it was just everyone was selling it wholesale. It was really the United States that kind of popularized that you could drink at the brewery. And then we saw that and we're like, okay, that sounds awesome.
Oh,
why
wineries were
don't
already doing
how do we
it.
do that?
Yeah.
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 So
But
it's relatively recent, but it's taken
Yeah.
off.
well, it seemed to be
Straight from the cow.
yeah. It seemed to be a kind of an
Always
open
better.
secret in the 19th century because like you would have established prices for that people seem to sort of talk about for like a glass of beer was 25 cents, like that was a normal price, or you could get a gallon for like $1, and that was the price you pay. And so it sort of seemed like it was up to the the police or like other enforcement officials, like who are they going to pick on in terms of deciding who to prosecute?
So
It was usually Columbia
pay
that
off the right people, and
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And I think that the brewery owned by Charles During, I think many more blind eyes were turned to any drinking that happened there. But Columbia was less wealthy and a bit more, it was in a bad area of town. And they were always picked up for that.
loose lips after too many Colombian beers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Must have
one
been
guy was
stronger.
like murdered on his way there. He's like, let's go have a glass of beer at the Columbia Brewery. I'll pay. They're walking down Hastings. And then his two friends kill him and leave
Wow.
him to die, and it just becomes associated with Columbia. These other guys, like, there's just killings and beatings and fires and all sorts of things happening at Columbia. Poor Columbia, they had it really rough. But she like
That's
hung
rough.
on. She hung on till the end, and the final owner, who was a woman, and we actually see in the records kept by Charles During's great grandson, the record books of the Vancouver breweries, the big brewery, that it looks like they were, I'm still trying to sort it out. So if you know any really good accountants who can like interpret 19th century accounting, it looks like they had loaned Columbia money, or they had done some kind of property exchange or something where Columbia would sort of pay them back, or they would be assisting Columbia otherwise financially, because Columbia's in their books with these repayments. And I didn't know that until I had access to those private files. So it seems that he kind of was this business person who used his own brewery as a kind of private bank for at least two other breweries.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Was during that time period, was it pretty uncommon for a woman to be brewing? Like,
Oh, yes.
historically,
Yeah.
brewing was a woman's job.
It was a woman's job until partway.
Yeah.
It was a woman's job until partway through the Middle Ages.
Yeah. And does that kind of tie into like alewives and like the witch hunt type of thing?
So
That part of it?
alewives were certainly stigmatized. That connection between alewives and witches is mostly a myth.
Okay.
So, and Dr. Christina Wade has done some amazing work on this. She has 2 new beer history books on. She's amazing. But women were definitely pushed out of the industry once it became profitable, once unions formed in the late Middle Ages, once guilds formed, not unions, guilds. And yeah, they were definitely pushed out as it became an industry that you could make money at. When it was more of a home industry, the women had full control, but yeah, they were definitely pushed out. By the time the 19th century brewers are taking over, it's all men. We have two examples that I could find at the time that were women, and they were both wives of an owner who had died. One was in Victoria, and one was in Columbia. For Columbia, both the brewmaster and her husband, who was a co-brewery owner, had died, and she was very well reputed in the city. Actually, we were told that she had a strong, capable mind and supervised 7 employees, and she kind of kept it limping along despite flooding and all sorts of stuff until about 1911. But it sounds like it was really hard, really hard for her. But she was a really interesting lady, and she's the lady I've talked about her before, who beat a guy with a horsewhip in her brew house. So
Okay.
yeah,
You were mentioning that at the book launch.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Got to set the tone.
yeah,
it was NPC. We like through our modern, I guess, history in craft beer. We've got a couple pretty prominent women as well. I'm
Mhm.
sure I mentioned Nancy and
Yeah.
Shirley in your book.
yeah.
Maybe you could elaborate a little bit on both of their roles. Yeah. If there's anybody else I'm forgetting.
Yeah, I mean,
Julia at Steamworks.
yeah. I'd say Shirley I probably wrote the most about. I also wrote about Lundy. I mean, Lundy Dale's not a brewer, but has done a lot for helping the industry since about 2000. But yeah, I mean, Nancy Moore is someone, and same with Julia. Both of them came from big beer, like Molson, Labatt, I think Julia's from Anheuser, isn't she? Or is she from Molson? No, she's from
She worked
Molson.
Molson Coors.
It's Molson, yeah.
Molson.
Yeah.
But Nancy is from Labatt and Guinness, and years of experience in big beer. And really, I think craft was pretty much all men for a while in the 80s. But by the time we get the 90s, we get Shirley Warren coming in, training in Toronto, then coming to Vancouver. We get it's not really until the 2000s that we get Julia and Nancy, but Julia and Nancy were being educated in big beer, and they basically come and they take those skills and they use those skills to help the craft industry. And I think the craft industry can only benefit from acquiring some of the skills that people can get through working for big beer, the quality assurance, and even some of the marketing stuff. And like there's a whole bunch of stuff that I think we can learn. So it really emphasized to me that we don't have to get super siloed about like, oh, if you can work craft or you can work corporate. Like I don't think that's necessary. I think there's a lot of benefits, a lot of cross cultural learning that can happen.
Yeah, for sure. And like lots of strengths coming from, I mean, both of those people.
Yeah, and in this
you
case,
guys want to hear more about Julia, it's episode 2.
That's right.
Yes. Yeah.
Nice.
And we should get Nancy on the show.
Nancy would be an amazing interview.
She's very charismatic. And has some incredible stories.
Oh yeah. I was just judging at the Canada Beer Cup, and Nancy is a fun person to hang out with because she was one of the judges too. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. No, those women have done a lot, and of course with Nancy with the KPU, the brewing program, it's done so much for just getting more quality brewers. Obviously, you guys know, in working in BC. So
totally.
Yeah.
Because now, I mean, it means no one's going to hire me as the brewmaster, but with my medieval skills. But yeah.
Hey, I mean, there's a couple working like museum breweries. I feel like that have started to pop up where it's like all period correct. You know, maybe that's
That's
right. Yeah. I've seen some YouTube videos. There's like one in, I think in like Pennsylvania or New York.
Yeah, that's the one.
It's all historical. I'm like, wow, that I thought my brewery was hard to work in sometimes. Take away electricity, that's a whole other game.
Use hot rocks and stuff.
Yeah. I just have duct tape and zap straps, but I don't know where I'd be without those.
You have to use pitch and make your own tar.
And apparently that
use gravity a lot.
So back to the gruit thing, apparently the use of pitch in those barrels is actually one of the possible reasons why people thought certain kinds of gruit had hallucinogenic qualities. It was because it was actually because of the pitch and not the gruit.
Leaching pitch.
Yeah. So
sweet
ideas for your next experimental beer. For your next cast series.
In my homebrew days, well, not my homebrew days, I should say, people I knew, homebrew adjacent days, I was homebrewing separately, but they made a gruit and they got everything from Burns Bog. And I guess they didn't really look into the interactions between certain herbs and during fermentation. And it's a great beer, but they're like, after about 1 to 2 pints, you get like really intense cold sweats. Diaphoresis. And like, we end up dumping it all.
Oh my god. Yeah, that's not a good sign. No.
But
there's a reason we switched to hops like a long time ago.
Using bog myrtle and whatnot.
Yeah.
There is a great Facebook group for those who are interested in using herbs and spices and beers called the Gruit Guild. That has a lot of references on historical dosing rates.
I'll check it out.
What's safe, what's not safe.
Yeah.
Nice.
And I know the guy from Antidote from Enton in Belgium. He contributes a lot on there because he primarily mixes beers without hops.
There's a lot of like information on historical brewing styles also from Martin Cornell and Zethophile. Yeah.
Thanks. So, so far you've done book launches with White Rock Beach Beer, Small Gods Brewing on the island and Main Street Brewery last week in Vancouver. Selling out of copies at 2 or 3 of those, as well as at the BC Beer Conference. Any more events in the books before holiday season? Or just
There
in
have been a
general?
few that were tossed around and nothing's confirmed right now. So, yeah, right now I'm just trying to catch up on work and raising foster puppies and
Yeah, fair
and
enough.
thinking about my next book. Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
So what are the foster puppies? What's the mix?
well, we don't know because these are all dogs rescued from northern communities in Manitoba that were wild. But she's like
Wow.
a shepherd, husky, lab kind of mix. Yeah, they're very cute. They look kind of like tiny little black bears. Yeah, they're like
Oh, that's
about
cute.
the size of like a really big sweet potato right now.
Goodness.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We fostered for this organization for a few years, but we've never what they call whelping, where you have the mother dog give birth in your home and you give them a safe place until they're fostered out. So
Oh,
yeah, first
wow.
time.
That's great.
Yeah.
Must be quite the
Wow, you're
experience.
brave.
Yeah, it's a little bit
Yeah.
crazy, but yeah.
And how big was the litter?
8 puppies. Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
So we have
Did you know that going into that?
no, I just knew that they were desperate for otherwise the litter probably would have
Yeah.
died, right? So they were like, well,
Yeah, for sure.
they were just going to be outside in
Okay.
Manitoba. But yeah, no, I was like, we have 11 dogs in our house. That feels like a lot. That feels kind of like too many. But at
Yeah.
least most of them
That's a lot.
are kept like they're kept in this little swimming pool, no water in it, but like they can't go anywhere. So
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
just kind of they're like little seals. Like they're not able to really use their back legs yet. So they're just kind of like
Yeah.
like this,
Yeah.
or they roll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, got distracted by puppies.
Yeah,
But
sorry.
where can people purchase the book?
Well, definitely Amazon. And if you use Amazon,
Yeah.
please feel free to leave a review. That's always really helpful. But also, like, it's at Black Bond Books and Book Warehouse, and I've seen it at a bunch of Save on Foods outlets.
Oh, nice.
Nice.
In the Lower
Awesome.
Mainland, so I'm guessing not elsewhere. But you could check Save on Foods, yeah, Black Bond chapters. I think Indigo has it,
Nice.
or they will order it in if they don't have it in stock. But I've seen several that have it in stock.
So request. Yeah.
So yeah, please
Nice.
do request, or please do leave a review.
It's,
People look at reviews.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's put out through Touchwood Editions.
Yeah,
Is
Touchwood
the
Editions.
company?
Yeah,
And yeah, so they're handling distribution for that.
yeah, great BC publisher. Yeah,
Great. Nice.
Yeah.
So being a writer for the Growler and the BC Ale Trail, how has the local beer scene changed over time? And is there any monumental shifts in decades? I guess you kind of went over the skip from the early 1900s to the 70s, but yeah, anything more recent that you've been noticing?
Well, obviously we have what you guys already mentioned, which was at the tasting rooms, right, in 2013.
Yeah.
And that was sort of the biggest influx of growth that we've seen in a long time with BC breweries. And it's really been growing exponentially until past 2 years where we've seen a bit of a contraction.
Right.
And there's been a lot of pain and anxiety and kind of panic about that, which I understand. But it's also something that I think was unavoidable because the kind of growth we have seen since 2013 can't be maintained. Like we just can't. And I agree with Jordan Foss's. I'm sure you guys read it. His article about this, where he says, I think there's actually a lot of good things that can come out of this, where we're going to get more focus on what really matters to people that love this industry. The kind of space that craft breweries offer, the kind of product that they offer is going to be, it's going to be a higher bar. It's going to be, it's going to bring improvement to the industry, I think, ultimately. So I see a lot of hope. I also really enjoy, so before he passed away, I spoke to Tony DeWald, amazing brewer.
Oh, nice.
And
Mhm.
he had a lot of hope for the industry too. He said he was looking and seeing more people who are interested in more breweries who are more interested in brewing more traditional styles rather than pursuing lots of novelty styles, but finding a
Yeah.
kind of stability, slow growth, sustainable growth by maybe turning back a little bit, by not relying on the novelty, not relying on only weird stuff, but instead,
Yeah.
going back to some of the older styles that weren't as sexy, maybe weren't as funky. And look, I mean, last year Deadfall won the Canada Beer Cup with a brown ale. So,
Yeah.
I think we are seeing that movement, and I think it's a good thing for the industry. And I am, at the same time, I mean, my heart goes out to breweries that are experiencing the pain. And I hope that everyone, I mean, I want everyone to pull through, right?
Yeah.
I want everyone to try to support their local brewery. That's what I try to tell people in interviews. It's like, go to your local brewery, buy beer from them, spend time in their tap room, like show them that you're willing to spend your money there, because they are barely making ends meet, most of them.
Yeah, and I think your book is a great window into some of these people's lives that are not I mean, me and Aslan are pretty we're out there, but most brewers are pretty, maybe introverted would be not a strong enough term.
Yes.
um, and so getting more insight into some of these folks and how long they've been in the industry and what they've done for our BC beer industry.
Yeah.
I'm learning already how much oh wow, I didn't realize I knew this brewer was at this brewery, but I didn't realize they started 3 other ones before that.
Yeah.
That kind of perspective kind of shows you how strong this industry is and how tight knit it is. And so yeah, if you can spend your hard-earned money to support these people, you're supporting a really cool legacy here in BC. And then I'm hoping that this story continues and grows. We can say that in 40 years as well. These people did this and helped it open and supported that. And yeah, so I think it's really cool if you can support those people. That's great, because we could all use it.
It is nice to sort of pull back the curtain a little bit and talk to these people who often they aren't doing their own PR, like they're not out there in front of
Yeah.
everyone. And some of them are harder to get a hold of than others, that's for sure. It took me forever to get a hold of Shirley Warren.
Yeah.
I'm very glad I did. Another really interesting person to talk to was Mark James of Red Truck. And he was
Okay.
possibly the most difficult person to access. And
Yeah.
he also wanted to know everyone I'd interviewed beforehand. He was he's a very intense kind of person.
Yeah.
But I mean, Red Truck's an important brewery for the city, and it was really interesting hearing about his perspective on it, running a large facility, but how even there margins are quite tight, and sort of how he got into it. But yeah, I could not find anything about him. He was so hard to research, and it took me
Yeah.
forever. I didn't think I'd ever get to interview him, and then finally I managed to I managed to get him to commit to a time, and I'm
Nice.
I'm really grateful for that, because he's definitely a very elusive person. So
Sweet. Well, I
yeah.
can't wait to read about that chapter here.
Yeah. The and the Mark James group
Mhm.
had a lot of the essentially founding brew pubs for the
Yeah.
90s scene of Vancouver, and Tri-Cities area. It was
Super important.
Yeah,
And I
pretty
think
impressive. And to
people,
see Red Truck grow to such a big brand that it has out of all of those.
and it
It's
started
Yeah.
with such a small, it started from extra beer
the
at
Taylor's
Taylor's
Crossing.
Crossing, right? And just selling it out of his
Yeah.
truck. And so, yeah, it was a small, really small beginnings, but those brew pubs were incredibly important. And it was also, so what was it that I was saying? So I was going to say that there's some, I know that every time I talk to people, they get mixed up. They think the Mark James group is the Mark Anthony group. I'm like, those are two very different businesses, but they sort of associate one with the other, and so they think whoever owns Red Truck is this huge corporation, which Mark Anthony Group is big, and they used to own the Stanley Park Brewing brand, but they're not, and that was something I did want to sort of make sure was very clear, because I kept on encountering that. And when I would have conversations with people and even in message boards and things, you'd see that mix up. But yeah, Mark James Group, not the same as Mark Anthony Group.
Mark Anthony Group.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With Babe Brew, that was a collaboration you participated with myself at Main Street in doing. How did you kind of connect with them, and have you done any continued work with Babe Brew? If you could provide a little bit about what they're about.
Yeah, so Babe Brew basically is an organization that helps that does collab brews with different breweries in order to raise money for grants for women in brewing. And I don't remember the first time I got involved with them. I mean, I'm active in the beer community on Instagram, so I think it was through that. But that I was really excited to see they were coming to Main Street and excited to participate in that. And then I participated in the Russell one as well, the Russell Brewing one.
Sweet.
And I was also excited to see they're doing one in White Rock, which is where I live. And
nice.
Yeah, and Pete and Bill at White Rock had actually gotten in touch with me, and they're like, "Oh, we had this opportunity, and we saw that you were involved, or like you participated in an early one of these brews, and what do you think?" And sort of they're just sort of looking around, saying like, "What is this all about?" You know. But it looks like they made the agreement, and they're going to do one next year. So they're doing a whole bunch in Canada now, which is really cool. It's about diversity and inclusion and equity in the industry, which we still need more of. If you see any of the Babe Brew cans, anyone out there listening, make sure you pick them up. They sell out pretty quickly. Yeah, they sell out. The one at Russell was really good. I remember the one at we did at Main Street was that really nice. It was a low ABV IPA. This one was like a hazy pale. But they've just released the new labels for next year's brews, and it looks really cool. So
sweet.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen them. I'll just take a look. You're slotted to do one for a January release.
I saw that.
This year, so
yeah,
looking forward to it.
Oh, Noelle, what excites you about the BC brewing industry these days? You kind of touched on it earlier about some of the challenges, but what's exciting you, and then where can we improve?
Well, I'm loving seeing all the awards BC breweries are winning. It's also great to see like the community gather together for things like the BC Craft Brewers Conference, which was like a great collegial, like really high energy kind of event, and also like the BC Beer Awards. Like these feel like very important kind of consolidating moments for the provincial industry. I just love everything about BC craft beer. Like every town I go to, like that's the first thing that I look for is like something. I love BC and I love the unique quality of all its different regions. And I think that's also why I like craft beer, is like I like to see how is it working in this particular city, in this particular area. And I feel like it's so unique. Like I don't feel like I'm going to get the exact same thing in every brewery that I go to. I feel I'm going to see that brewery's personality. And so that's what I really love about BC beer. And I'm, as I look more towards maybe doing more writing, doing more historical writing about it, like doing more research into different regions, different areas. I like looking behind the curtain and sort of finding out why things are the way they are.
That's cool. Awesome.
So for anyone new to craft beer, some words to encourage them to try what's out there. What's your favorite beer style?
Oh, I don't have a favorite beer
Your
style.
favorite gateway beer?
It depends on what day, what weather it is, and how warm it is, and where I am.
Yeah, couldn't agree
Oh,
more. Like, there's
it's
a right
I.
beer for every setting.
There's a right beer for every setting, and it depends on like what that person already likes. As I'm discovering this, as I like study things like food and beer stuff for the Cicerone examinations, and I want to encourage people that it's okay to like what they like. That they don't have to
Yeah.
be ashamed that you don't like a Brett Saison, like what's wrong with you? That it's
Yeah.
okay. It's okay if they like Coors or whatever. But if you like Coors, like there's going to be a craft beer that I almost guarantee you'll probably like even more. That it's going to be
Yeah.
like a Coors, but it's just going to have a bit more oomph to it. Like it's going to have a little bit more like depth or flavor. It's going
Yeah.
to have the heart of what you like about Coors,
Yeah.
but it's going to be
It's
better.
that like taste of the region or something.
Yeah.
It's like that.
Yeah.
So like
Something to be proud of.
whatever you like is cool.
Your
Like,
local brew.
yeah, whatever you like is cool, and no one should be ashamed of what they like. And at the same time, I guarantee there'll be an independently produced craft beer that will be in your style, within your palate, within the style that you enjoy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely true. There's a beer being produced all over this province that will meet whatever expectation you want. There's
Yeah.
tons of them. It's crazy. Awesome. So what takes up your time outside of teaching and writing? Yeah, I hear maybe some belly dancing.
Yeah. So I'm a belly dancer. It's been really busy this semester, so I haven't done as much as usual. But yeah, I do belly dancing at restaurants and parties and that kind of stuff. My Instagram is beer, books, belly dance because those are the three things that I do a
Those
lot
are the
of.
things.
I teach
The three
literature.
Bs.
I teach literature.
Yeah.
I teach literature. I drink beer, and I do belly dance. I've done belly dance for a very long time. But so I just embraced all of it together rather than separating it because I was like, I don't have to be ashamed. I can do all of it. Although
Yeah.
a friend of mine always says, she adds at the end, I don't know if you guys have watched The Office, but she adds at the end, beer, books, belly dance, Battlestar Galactica. Like Dwight from The Office. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah. So I do belly dancing and, have all my animals, and I have 2 children, married. Yeah, that's kind of
Yeah.
keeping busy. A very supportive family though, and kids who
Nice.
will sort of say, like, they'll participate in, like, yeah, smell the beer, yeah, it smells different. It's like beer holds no
Yeah.
romance for them. They're
Right.
teenagers. Beer holds no romance. Or like, oh, like I'm gonna go get buzzed on beer. Like they don't.
Yeah.
That's what my
Not
parents
interested.
drink.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's ridiculous. Yeah, but yeah, and I'm also studying for I'd like to take my beer judge second level, like recognized beer judge certification, and I'd like to get my certified Cicerone, which is like
All
a
right.
beer sommelier. If people don't know about that designation. But I've been doing a little bit of beer judging, and that's really, I feel that's been super helpful to me. It's been really educational. It's been
Not just any small competitions. You
Yeah.
judged the Canada Beer Cup.
So yeah, that was the last one. Yeah, in September.
Yeah.
Thank you
Yeah.
very much to Joe Weeb for supporting my application. Unfortunately, he got COVID and couldn't come, which really sucked. But I was very lucky to. There's lots of women. There's 30 judges, and almost half were women. And the final
Awesome.
Best in Show judging panel of 5 people were all women, and I got to be on that panel, which was really amazing.
Wow, you got to pick the winner.
Again, an amazing experience. Yeah, but I feel like
Nice.
I definitely had the least experience of those people. But I feel like I learned a ton, and it inspired me to continue studying for my Cicerone. So
nice, yeah. Is it okay? I just was like, if you haven't been convinced already to buy this book, I'd love to read like a little anecdote from it, which made me laugh today. It was, I don't know if is it okay? There's no spoilers.
Or you can read whatever you like.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the book is probably worth it alone just for the James Walton chapter. Just that alone, it's probably worth it. Then he goes, where was that? Yeah, it says on page 252, he recalls, this is James Walton from Storm Brewing in Vancouver. Recalls that around 2000, he made a line of medicinal beers, many of which had some sort of sexual health component. A UTI beer, an echinacea stout, and a sex tonic beer aptly named Stiff Breeze. And then it says, yeah, the 2003 Great Canadian Beer Festival program describes Stiff Breeze as a stout-based tonic to counter brewers' droop. I was like, that sounds about right for Storm.
Yeah. Yeah, I was like, they actually put this in the program.
Did you pull that from the archives
Yeah,
as well,
that
or was
was
that
from
just...
the archives. It was the original program.
Wow?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
But yeah, James is a fun guy to talk to as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's more in there too. That's just that's one sentence, put it that way, from that chapter. So there's lots to pull from there. But yeah, so lots of fun anecdotes, and I gotta find these archives and
You should go.
see
You
what's
should.
there.
Yeah. They're
it's
so
cool.
nice.
Yeah.
Like the folks who run it are so nice.
There you go.
Yeah.
Next field trip.
Yeah,
Totally. Yeah.
yeah. Me and Aslan are gonna make a beer from the archives. That's what.
Yeah. There's
that'd be fun.
there's a bunch of different like handwritten like recipes and things if you dig around enough.
That's fun.
Yeah.
That's rad.
Some of the most thorough, like R&B has a really thorough collection. And Granville Island has a really thorough collection, like the early records from Granville Island, because Mitch Taylor gave all of his materials to the archive. So,
Wow.
yeah.
That's sweet. We'll find the original Granville Island Winter Ale. We'll bring it back.
Oh, there we go.
I love that. That's actually another one of the specific Granville Island beers that really like got me like, oh, I really love this. Was their winter ale. Yeah.
Yeah, everyone I talked to, same thing. Yeah. Granville Island Winter Ale.
There's so many good
It used to
memories.
be different.
Yeah,
used to be
they always
different.
say that.
It's
Yeah.
like,
I can tell you what it was, but
yeah. Who knows if it was different or not?
There's actually a box of unopened Island Light Lager from 1989, the full bottles that are in the archive.
Wow.
If you want to see how Island Light Lager ages over 30 years. Yeah.
Probably not
Probably
good.
not a great aging beer, I'm guessing.
No. And I don't think they're wax dipped.
No, they're not. I am curious about how terrible it would be to try one, but yeah. It's not like the champagne
nice
that you
like
find.
it'll usually just taste bad. It shouldn't kill it.
Yeah. Well, fingers crossed. Yeah.
Shouldn't.
Yeah.
Shouldn't. Yeah.
Yeah, but actually the box is signed by everyone who was working at the brewery at the time as well.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah, it had just been kept in Mitch Taylor's basement for decades.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Well, Noelle,
Awesome.
It's been great having you on the podcast and learning about the history of the craft beer scene.
Yeah,
that's
you.
like so close to us. It's I mean, I like to think that we already have a good idea of it, but definitely have barely scratched the surface.
Sometimes I feel like I barely scratch the surface. Like I feel like there's all these little details, and you feel like you haven't covered everyone as much as they deserve to be covered. You know, you just can't. There's so many stories, and yeah.
So leading up to the holiday season, make sure to buy Noelle's book. Get that for your dad or mom who's got a real passion for something tasty and sudsy, or just quirky history.
Yeah, local history buffs, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Ask for it for yourself. If you're like me and your wife's like, "What do you want for Christmas?" I'm like, "I don't know." Usually, I buy everything that I want. So now you got something. You tell your significant other, "I want this book." There you go.
Yeah. So you
perfect.
can get it on Amazon, Indigo, other places, as Noelle mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
It seems like it's well distributed, so and make sure to leave a review.
I would love that. Yeah. And if you're in the Lower Mainland and you want it signed, you send me a message on Instagram and I'll get back to you.
Yeah. Beer Books Belly Dance. Get your signature. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, and the book's called Brewmasters and Brewery Creek. So if you're like at your computer now, but like, what's it called? That's it. By Noelle Phillips.
Ta-da! Here it is.
Looks like this. Oh, very nice. That's solid. Like,
It's solid. It feels. I was
nice
like, when I
book.
got the book copy, I was like, it feels a lot bigger than it seemed when I was just going through the PDFs on my computer. It
Yeah.
seemed shorter.
Yeah, I was like, whoa, this is like, I was expecting something like half the size. I'm like, oh, this,
I was
how
too.
long has brewing been a thing in Vancouver? Not that long. And then I was like, oh, wow, this is like, there's a lot to it. So it's
Yeah.
awesome. It's super thorough.
This is why I ended up being only Vancouver and not all of the Lower Mainland and Victoria, which is like initially my idea. I was like, oh no,
Yeah.
it's just going to be Vancouver. So
Well, you got to
Some
save
rumor
it for the
has it
sequel,
that-
right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There might be a sequel in the works.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm considering that. Yeah. So
Yeah.
Nice.
Once all the dust settles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for doing this. This has been great.
yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It was very fun to talk about beer and books and puppies and belly dance and brewing and everything. So yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Awesome. And if you want to support the podcast, you can follow us on Instagram at Why This Beer, or on Facebook, Why This Beer. And yeah, you can leave us a review too. Leave us only 5 stars, please.
We're sensitive.
Yeah.
We're sensitive. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, that would be great. And just tell people about the podcast. We have some more great guests coming up in the next few weeks, and yeah, we're excited about it. And yeah, you can support Aslan and I by buying beer from our breweries, Main Street Brewing and Neighborhood Brewing in Penticton. And yeah, or come visit the brewery. And I don't know what else.
Say hello.
Aslan. Say hello. Come on, yeah.
Yeah.
We're friendly-ish.
Let's talk beer in person.
Yeah. And if you buy the book, you can see Aslan, you got into the book, I was going to say, too. It's pretty cool.
I know, that was a
No big
surprise.
deal.
Yeah.
Subtle flex. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very noble picture of
Cool.
him. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That looks good.
Excited.
Immortal now.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, yeah. Thanks, everyone, for listening. And until next time, we'll say cheers.
Cheers to BC Cream Ale.
Yes.
Yeah, cheers.